On today's Locked On Bucks, we continue our season preview of sorts, taking a look at win totals, projected win totals, the over-unders for every single team in the league. We put together our own draft. We'll explain the logic behind it and our choices coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis and Frank Madden. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks brought to you by Fan Duel. Now through September 22nd, all Fan Duel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit fanduel.com to get started. All right. We mentioned we pulled off a draft a couple of days ago, and I guess we'll talk through explaining what this was. We took a look at every single team's projected win totals, the over-unders from FanDuel. And how would we explain this? Basically, if you played games like Cover 5, where you're betting against the spread and you want to find the most value, that's what we looked at. So you were looking for teams that you thought would either outperform their win total, be in line with it. You just didn't want teams that were going to fall under that win total. So we each drafted 10 teams and randomized the order. I ended up with the last pick, which for the final round, in my view, was a good thing because it meant I got to avoid two teams I did not want. But we'll flash up the teams that we each drafted momentarily. But let's just start with each of us talking through the first pick that we made in that first round. So the order for this draft was Frank, Camille, and then me. And Frank, you started things with the team that I think a lot of people would have probably drafted in this spot to say, we think the win total is probably going to grow because of a young superstar on that team. And that was the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, as I was going through this, my part of my psychology is, I was like, well, maybe I should, I don't mind picking teams that I don't like because then at least I get something during the season. At least I can feel like I picked the team. I get something out of them being good when I don't really necessarily want them to be good. This became a recurring theme as the draft went on. But this team is the San Antonio Spurs are, a quite likable team in the grand scheme of the universe. What year two Wemby obviously is something everybody is super excited for. How long is it going to take before he's the best player in the world? It feels like an inevitability at some point over the next, 2-3 years that's going to happen, which is pretty wild. And so it's crazy. What was it? 36.5, I think the over under was for a team that what did they win 22 games last year? Like to bake in a huge win jump. And on top of that, still feel like, there is a fair bit of upside to improve upon that. I mean, the West obviously is really difficult. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like, oh, I think they're going to make the playoffs and like whatever else. But I think the combination of Wembanyama in year two, he's not going to be starting at power forward next to Zach Collins anymore, as they did at the start of last year. And perhaps most importantly, you're moving from the like self-sabotaging tactic of starting Jeremy Sohan at point guard early last year to having Chris Paul as, your veteran kind of steadying hand, in addition to having Trey Jones. And a pretty highly touted rookie who, again, Castle, I'm not expecting him to be some huge positive impact on winning, but just if Pop can just like stop doing stupid sabotaging stuff, which you would hope Pop could do, like he's one of the handful of best coaches in league history, then I think this should be a pretty exciting team. And living in Austin, it'd be nice to have an exciting team down in San Antonio. They play a couple of games in Austin most years now, so they have to check them out. And some people who've listened to the pod for a long time know the Spurs were actually my first favorite team other than the Bucks. Early 90s, David Robinson was my favorite player. So bringing it full circle a little bit here.
Just looking through the 10 teams that each of us selected, Frank, I think, yeah, you did have the most in terms of number of teams that I was really hoping to get in this draft. The Spurs weren't one of them, but your next pick was. Camille, your first pick was one of those teams that I was really targeting as well. I think we talked about it on a previous pod a week or so ago in my thoughts of what the ceiling is for this team in the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, number 2 pick, Charlotte Hornets. Shout out to Charles Lee. That's part of my confidence level in making that particular pick. I mean, the Hornets won like 21 games last year. The over/under for their projected win total, I believe, was 29 for them. So looking at that and thinking like, okay, a new head coach coming in, instilling his system. I got a lot of faith in Charles Lee being able to establish a good baseline for the culture there. If LaMelo can stay healthy, pair him with what you saw from uh,
Brandon
Brandon Miller
Miller.
last year. Like I think that they can definitely get around that 29-30 win mark this season. So I was trying to pick a team that was like not great last year, but had a lot of potential. When I looked at Charlotte, that was one of those rosters where I was like, I could see them making a little jump this upcoming year, even if they just had health. With everyone who they had last year coming back, just a little bit more health, I think would have done them well. So I mean, at this point, one might argue that's taking a big leap of faith of projecting that LaMelo Ball stays healthy for a long period of time next season, since he's had injury-riddled start to his career on and off. So, but that was my logic behind it. The Charles Lee boost, and then just having some faith in Charlotte being a little bit healthier and a bit more talented than they were last year.
They won 21 games last year, but finished the season on a tear, winning 3 of their final 6 games. But yeah, I mean, Charles Lee being an adult in the room is going to be big for that team, and some of the continued develop health is going to be big for them as well. My first round pick was probably the team in the West that it seems like most people now are starting to gravitate towards. Oh, that team, look out for them. They're back. The Memphis Grizzlies. So as we talked about last year, basically the season from hell for that team with all the injuries. You are assuming health for them and no major moves that they made in the offseason. They drafted Zach Edey as well. My one reservation when I look through all 10 of my teams is it's very Western Conference heavy. And I mean, the wins have to come from somewhere. So it does feel like I left the draft feeling pretty good about the overall makeup of my roster or teams. But now when you look at it, you think, all right, probably half of these teams close to that are going to come in close to under, because I really loaded up. I think I had 2 or 3 teams that were in the East of all my picks. So that's already, as I start to examine this, the one concern that I have for the group of teams.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair concern, which was something I was trying to avoid. Like Boston was a team on the list where I was like, the projected win total is 58.5, where I was like, I mean, we saw them clear it last year for sure, but starting the season off with Porzingis injured, championship team coming back into the next season, I was like, that one feels ambitious. And maybe I'm overlooking it. I definitely think they can be a 50-win team for sure with Boston, but I was like, getting that 59, and I was like, that might be 55, 54 for them. So I was trying to avoid them and the Thunder, to be honest, just those two, like the top teams, those top numbers. I was trying to play it as close to the best as possible, knowing that it's the total of all the over-unders, where I was like, okay, I'm going to pick some bad teams here and a couple of good teams in the hope that they balance themselves out over the course of the draft or season, I should say.
My general see, it's interesting because like my tactic was generally like trying to stay away from those kind of teams in between or bad. Like basically try to stay away from teams that might have an incentive at some point to tank, especially with this draft being so highly touted, Cooper Flag, et cetera. I just kind of looked at it and was like, if you have your own draft pick, then like I thought long and hard about the Jazz. The Jazz were a team I ultimately drafted with my second to last pick. And part of me was like looking at them and being like, wow, Will Hardy's a really good coach, and Markkanen's now locked in for the year. They can't trade him. So like talent wise, like they, are kind of up and coming. Like they seem like, 29.5 or whatever the line is, like they're going to have a hard time doing worse than that. But it's like Danny Ainge is kind of always hanging over things like what could he potentially do if he tries to get out of that, or again, Larry Markkinen gets some
Just because they can't trade him doesn't mean that Larry
yeah, it
Markkinen
doesn't mean he's going to
doesn't
play
have an
all year.
illness.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So most of my picks definitely gravitated towards the archetype of very good team with maybe like a little bit of upside to get better. And obviously, Justin, we can kind of jump into some of the specifics, but that was definitely the theme of my picks. I think my top 8 picks. I don't think I had any teams under a 47.5 over under. Because again, I was just mainly about looking and saying like, okay, who do I know is going to be like pretty good with the potential to be really good. And that way, and I know we kind of talked about this before the pod too, like, you can kind of look at this also, like, are you just trying to like, binary, you win it or lose it or put, whatever. Or are you looking at this and trying to,
Stay in the middle.
yeah, or well, I was looking at too, like I was looking at it like from the sense of like maximizing my total differential of wins relative to the over unders. So I was definitely trying to lean more in towards teams that I felt had upside and leaning away from teams that had that downside, which, again, like tended to be more in my mind, like the teams that might tank. So yeah, that definitely came through in terms of the types of teams that I picked.
Some more logic behind all of the teams that we drafted, our philosophies going into this, and which one of us ended up with the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll get into that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Fan Duel. You have heard us talk about them quite a bit. They are America's #1 sports book. And now we have something a little different for you, because now through September 22nd, all Fan Duel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit fanduel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. So, the logic piece behind this was there was really, I suppose, 2 approaches to this, Frank. As you mentioned, you could try to see, okay, which teams do we think are going to overperform this? But that list, at least in terms of ones that would give you a big payoff, it just seemed like it was maybe 2 or 3 teams that you would look at and say, okay, I can see some pretty decent movement on this. The rest just felt like you basically had to just minimize the damage. You don't want that team that has the potential for teams or players being injured and falling severely under what their projected win total was. So I tried to gravitate kind of half and half of, okay, what teams do I think are going to outperform this win total, knowing that's maybe 1 or 2 that we're looking at here, or with the halves, a win and a half that you're going to get, maybe a half of a win there. But there was, I mentioned maybe 3 or 4 teams that I just really wanted no part of. And Frank, you touched on that. If the teams that have no reason to try to make the playoffs, we already know, I think, comfortably who 2 of those teams are. The last 2 picks in this draft, in the Brooklyn Nets and the Washington Wizards. But to your point about the Utah Jazz, that was another one that I thought about. I ended up with the Detroit Pistons. That was another one that kind of worried me when I did take the pick of, well, what if Detroit just punts this? But then you factor in, well, new coach, they added professional players. Like, they're not going to be a playoff team, but they're probably going to win around like 26, 27 games this season. So it really just started to become, all right, I just don't want these 2 teams. And thankfully, with having the first pick of the last round, I didn't have to get those 2.
Yeah, picking in the middle was not ideal in this particular draft, because at least you 2 got the benefit of being able to do the double picks on the end of the snake draft. But the Heat was that team for me where it was like, I don't know what to make of the Miami Heat going into this upcoming season. I would think that they would underperform. Like, it's just, but they're so hard to figure out. It's like the years you think that the Miami Heat aren't going to do anything, they end up being the 8th seed that knock the Bucks out of the play, where you're just like, wait, what's happening again? And this is a season 2 with all the Jimmy Butler talk around the contract situation that he has going on, where I was like, I'm not sure what version of Jimmy Butler we're going to be able to see throughout the year. So that was a team that I was trying very hard to avoid and ended up getting with my second to last pick in the draft, where at that point, there just weren't that many great options. And then I didn't feel great about it either, given the fact that the over-under for games won for the Heat was at 44.5, where I was like, they could be above that greatly. They could be below it greatly. I don't know what to make of this Miami team. So that was one for me where I was like, not feeling great about them.
Frank, who was the team that you just desperately wanted to avoid in this, or teams?
Well, the Wizards were the last pick in the draft, and I had no choice but to take them. So not feeling good about that, especially from given what we saw from Alexander Sarr in Vegas and everything. But it is what it is. It's funny, I look at my picks. I basically have, spoiler alert, every good Eastern Conference team other than the Bucks. So I don't know how I feel about that. I took the Cavs second, Magic third, Pacers fifth, Knicks sixth, and Celtics eighth. Which I don't know how I ended up. I guess Justin, you're the Western Conference guy. You're the good Western Conference teams. I have the good East teams, and Camille has a bunch of stuff in the middle, I guess.
Exactly. For both conferences.
So that's kind of how this draft worked out. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of like with so many of these teams, it sort of ended up looking at them, like the Cavs and Magic, I think we're both at 47.5. I think the Pacers, I think they were all right around the same. I think they're right around 47.5 in terms of the over under. Yeah, Cleveland 47, Indiana 47.5. Yeah, Orlando all 47.5 over unders. So it just feels like one of those teams is going to at least be a 50-win team. I doubt any of those teams are going to be much lower than that. Certainly I think Cleveland bringing in Kenny Atkinson was never a big JB Bickerstaff believer, and I don't know. The Cavs have been such a weird team. I just think when they kind of just play their fundamentals, like they should be good. Like they should be a really good team. And again, maybe that kind of coaching bump will serve them well. And Magic kind of similar, right? Like you're playing the upside of a young team. And similar with Indiana, kind of similar story there, right? I hope I'm dead wrong. I hope all those teams stink, and the Bucks, and I'm not going to assume the Celtics are going to have a big drop off, but hopefully the Bucks and Celtics can separate like we hoped they might have last year. But yeah, I mean that was kind of where I had. I think the team I was most pleased to land, or the one that in hindsight I think may have kind of sneaky most upside. The Suns with my fourth pick. The Bud effect there. I think I was looking at it like since from January 1st onward. I think they had the point differential of like a 54-win team. And again, on the one hand, can you count on 65 games from KD and Bradley Beal? No, that's silly. And even Devin Booker's had, his fair share of injuries. So, you're kind of fighting a losing battle with, I think, the age and injury history there with your best three players. But, what we know of Bud, his prior two stops, obviously the year one impact was really tangible and very significant. So I'm not expecting 60 wins from the Suns, but I'd be surprised if they don't win 50 games. So for a team that came in as a yet another 47.5 win over under team, that just felt like good value. And again, like I think there may be some upside there. And again, I'm not buying the Suns as like a championship team necessarily, but as a team that could win 55 games and outperform in the regular season thanks to a good defensive system. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Bucks fan, and I still have some belief in Bud that he can kind of work his Bud magic.
That was the team that I was most disappointed to not get for those same reasons that I just think the Suns are going to be a lot better this season. As we've talked about a lot, especially around the time the Bucks made another coaching change. It's not to take away from Bud, but he raises the floor of every team that he's at. And that Suns team, granted, the Western Conference is tougher than the East was in 2018, but that Suns team has more talent than the Bucks team that Bud took over and took to 60 wins. So I have moderately high expectations for them. Camille, yours, the midpoint of your draft was interesting because you got both Los Angeles teams and you got the team that we cover.
Yeah, so when looking at that one, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to take a team with a pretty big, over under right there. So I was like, let me go with the Bucks here. 50.5 for their over under. And I was like, the Bucks have generally been a 50-win team for the last few years. So I'm like, that doesn't feel like it's outside the realm of possibility for them to hit. So I was like, I'll take that opportunity on them. But then I went with the Clippers after that, which was one of those ones where I was like, 40.5 is set for their win projection this season. And that's a team that won 51 games last year. And I know they don't have Paul George. They lost him there, but they were able to keep James Harden. They have Kawhi Leonard, and they have some interesting other pieces around them, not including PJ Tucker, old friend of the Milwaukee Bucks there. But like I like Cam Christie as a rookie. I like the Batum. I like just a few pieces they have. So like, again, a team where I don't think that they're going to be a big playoff contending team in the West this year just because of the depth in the West. But when I saw it was only 40.5, I said, I'll take that opportunity. And it was similar with the Lakers, where I'm like, it's low enough where it's like, if you can just go 500, we're close. Like, I'm in business. If you can just go 500 this season. And for the Lakers, it was giving them that little JJ Redick bump, just that new coach. They might just have a little bit more energy. But again, I'm thinking they can be at least a 500 team and probably hover somewhere around there. And then one more team I got for my list, because I went Hornets, Warriors, Kings, Bucks, Clippers, Lakers. That Kings team was one for me where I was like, last year, I think they won 46 games last year as well. And they finished like sixth or set, like farther down in the conference than they did the year before, when it was like a 3-game difference from what they had did this past season and the year before. So for them, like, okay, they made the DeMar DeRozan trade. Like, they should have a little bit momentum. Like, I can see them kind of steadying out where they were before. So that was another one where I was like, I feel pretty decent about that. So that was like my logic in that middle part of the draft, going Kings, Bucks, Clippers, Lakers. Like, let me try for Bucks. I think there's a lot of potential upside there. And as for Clippers, Lakers, I think that's 500 basketball at worst for those teams. So let's take that chance there. And then for the Kings, like, I can see you guys being pretty similar in that win column where you have been the last 2 years. So like, let's take that bet as well.
The Bucks one is interesting to me, Frank. We haven't gotten your take on this, but it seems like Camille and I have been asked quite a bit, where are the Bucks going to finish in the East this season? And what's, where do you see them falling in terms of outcomes, which is impossible to get into until we actually see what the playoff draws are. But maybe it was a cop out every time I've answered. I can see anywhere from second to fifth. I lean more towards fourth or fifth that I see them finishing in the East. But I think there is definitely a path with some of those teams around them. I think I took the 76ers pretty early in this just because I think they're playing for the regular season again, and they're going to finish with the best record in the Eastern Conference. All the pieces that they added outside of Paul George are more,
not including Boston,
including Boston. I think
you're thinking they're going to go 1 seed.
Wow. The Sixers, yeah, I do, because I mean, Porzingis we know is not going to play until at least January, and I don't think the Celtics are going to be bad and drop down to fourth or anything like that. But I mean, you see it all the time too when you're the reigning champion. There's not quite as much of that drive to get to the level that you were before, that it's, I guess, taking your foot off the gas and just resting and playing for the regular season. So, yeah, I do think the 76ers are going to outperform that and be the 1 seed in the East.
Are you not worried about the Boston Celtics revenge tour this summer after the summer of disrespect that they have felt that they have gotten?
You mean the Jaylen Brown revenge tour?
Oh yeah, and Jason Tatum. How dare you sit Jason Tatum in the Olympics? Like, there's some things to prove here for those guys. And we've had new champions the last 6 years in a row. I think Boston's going to look to that as being something like, hey, let's be the first to back-to-back over the last few years here. So like, I think there's some motivation there for Boston to try to take the regular season somewhat seriously.
You think that's a crazy?
I would say that. I mean, I've been looking at the Sixers, and I feel like I've generally felt like people are kind of overrating them,
overvaluing,
in the sense, yeah, and just in the sense that mean, the Embiid injury risk is just kind of always kind of hanging over things. He obviously did stuff this summer with Team USA, which, I mean, you could spin it positively as like, well, he actually had to like, I'm not saying he got in shape given the way he looked in the Olympics, but he actually had to like do some cardio over the summer, which maybe he doesn't normally do. But, I mean, look, his dominance in the regular season kind of speaks for itself. But I don't know. The Paul George thing is interesting. I mean, I think Paul George he was still an awesome player. You look at his advanced metrics last year, they were really impressive. He's not like, it's not like he's fallen off a ton given his age, but I think he's 34 going on 35. And, has had his own share of injuries, and, it's just like, what is he going to be on that team? Like, I think what he averaged, like, 21 a game last year. I mean, again, like I think it's going to be interesting to watch that contract given his age and what he's going to give you. I mean, I don't blame them for using it the way they did, but I don't know. Is he going to be like a 18 points per game guy? Like probably good efficiency. He's a good spot up shooter. So, I think he's pretty malleable, but you also can't expect him to be like a defensive stopper 82 games a year at his age as well. And I'm really curious just from a size perspective, if they're starting Cody Martin, that leaves them pretty small. I know that they have Drummond, so they have, center size, but you're not going to like twin towers it with Drummond and
you don't think it's Gerson Yabusele that's going to be
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm always cautious of kind of getting too buying too much into really any of the kind of Euro guys that come over midstream. And again, usually the archetype of those guys is that they're less athletic types, and Yabusele has a bit more maybe physical tools, maybe not pure athleticism, but big ass and runs like a freight train, and that's kind of different than maybe your typical Euro, like some of the guys that we've seen come over. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just a little bit wary. Let me say that I'm a little wary. I think it's very easy for them to be a fashionable pick, though, given the excitement. I think your point, though, is a good one about they're not going to like mail in the regular season in favor of being ready for the playoffs. I think even though they'll probably pay lip service to the idea of like not wanting to overwork Embiid and things like that, I do think the regular season probably matters more to them than it does to a team like the Bucks. It's almost like you got to like, when you have a new team, you have to like get through that first season and then realize like, oh yeah, like it really is all about the playoffs to learn your lesson, even though they've obviously lost so many times, in the first round or second round, being the Celtics, the Sixers. So I don't know. I'm a little wary. I think, it's hard to completely overhaul your roster and just have everything like work straight off right out of the bat. But it's interesting litmus test certainly for Nick Nurse and his ability to coach. But they were really good last year, and I looked it up. And the Celtics were 21-4 without Porzingis last year, which again, like how scalable is that? Al Horford's a year older. Luke Cornett is not a guy that I think you want to play a ton of minutes. But man, I mean, Joe Mazzulla deserves a ton of credit. Like it just felt last year like they could miss key guys and just not really miss a beat. So I think it's hard for me to pick anybody but the Celtics at this point. But look, I would love it if, even though as much as I hate the Sixers, I would love it if Boston did not finish with the 1 seed. And if that happens, I think it creates an interesting dynamic because, I mean, healthy Celtics, you still, I think, would pick them over anybody in the playoffs. So if they're like in the 2 seed or something like that, then that also creates some interesting dynamics with playoff seeding. So I don't know, but I think as far as the Bucks go, I was talking to Eric Name about this recently, and I don't think Eric's a homer, but Eric was just like, I think they're a great overpick. I mean, his view was like, especially after last year and all the noise and kind of chaos, he thinks they're going to be a really good team this year, and get into the 50s, and that's not going to be too difficult. And so I think it is like kind of just, I'm always kind of probably more pessimistic just because of my 30 years of suffering or whatever it was as a Bucks fan. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of doing the debits and credits, right? You've got a number of key guys are a year older. I hope the Chris injury thing or surgery thing isn't something that we're really talking about once we see him on the floor.
Yeah, did we see any video of him dancing at Giannis's wedding? Because I feel a lot more comfortable if
Yeah. So I mean, there's kind of the age factor, but then I
Mhm.
think there is the kind of year of kind of getting the gang together and having a motivation to, even if they're not going to go all out 100% in the regular season. This is a team that has something to prove, and I don't think they're going to mail in, the Wizards, Grizzlies back to back
I
like we
hope
saw
not.
last year. I don't think I hope you're not going to see that, but I still do think what we saw last year, I think, was a bit of a shot across the bow. Like the idea of the Bucks being a lower than like 3 seed, during like the Bud era or whatever, like that can't be lower than a 3 seed, right? And for them last year, even though they were the 3 seed, like the way that they finished the year was just, you know, kind of just shook your belief to an extent,
Mhm.
especially with a second straight playoff fizzling out, even if obviously Giannis wasn't a part of it. So yeah, I would say I think they're going to win in the low 50s. But it's hard. It's hard winning high 50s. Even though the
Consistently
Bucks,
too.
yeah, even though the Bucks did it only a couple years ago,
Yeah.
it's not easy. And I think you just kind of can't take anything for granted. But hopefully good health, and Dame he may not be what he was 2 years ago, but hopefully he's certainly at least better than he was last year.
All right, so there's our draft, and again, to explain it a little bit more, as we started to do it at the top of the episode and maybe didn't do such a great job. What you're looking for are teams that you think are going to outperform their win totals. So if you take a team whose over under is projected at 52.5 and they win 56 games, you would get 3.5 points. So we're going to add all of the scores up at the end of the season and see who did the best job at projecting this. Now, if you take a team that's projected to win 52.5 games and they win 44 games, then you lose 7.5 points. So that's how we're going to determine who did the best job in this exercise, and where some of that explanation started to come in as well, of what's the approach that you take. Are you looking for value, or are you just looking to stay in the middle and to avoid those teams that could be due for a letdown? As we wrap here, we'll flash the draft up on the screen for those of you viewing on YouTube. The first round was the Spurs, the Hornets, and the Grizzlies from Frank, Camille, and myself. We walked through our picks essentially one by one. Camille ends up with the Bucks. Frank has all of those Eastern Conference top-heavy teams. I have most of the Western Conference with the Mavericks, the Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the New Orleans Pelicans, and then my last three picks, the Pistons, the Trailblazers, and the Toronto Raptors. Last three picks of this draft, I took the Raptors, Camille took the Brooklyn Nets, and the final pick of this draft, Frank taking the Washington Wizards. So that is it. That is the over-under win totals draft for this upcoming season. So we filed this away. We'll do the calculations at the end of the year and to figure out who scored the best, who gained the most points by way of their teams outperforming their win totals. We'll figure out some type of prize or punishment as well. But that will do it for today's show. We're going to be back once again tomorrow with Frank once again as we pivot the conversation from the win totals draft to more of a view of the Eastern Conference and the Milwaukee Bucks specifically. Camille and I already went through the reasons to be optimistic and pessimistic. Frank weighs in on some of those, and spoiler alert, very optimistic about the Bucks' chances this upcoming season. So we'll get into that conversation with Frank Madden coming up tomorrow on Locked On Bucks. That will do it for today. However, for Frank and Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.